Hi, everybody. It's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Klatch Conversations with Candidates. This is where you get to know your candidate through a question and answer forum, and if you're watching live, you can send questions to us right now, and we will get them to your candidate. And so tonight's guest is Adam Sovkoplas. See, here I go. Adam Sovkoplas.
Sovkoplas.
There you go. I practiced that before. I promise. He's running for the House seat in District 62, and he's going to be our candidate for tonight. So please, Adam, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our audience why you're running?
Thank you. Hello, Kentucky, and hello, District 62. I'm originally from South Texas, Brownsville, Texas. My parents owned a motel, and our home was actually on the property, so I grew up living on and working at a motel, which you can probably imagine means that I have a great deal of experience with small business. Everything we did ourselves. If it broke, we fixed it. If somebody damaged something, we repaired it. Replacing toilets, replacing water heaters, whatever it was, we did it. So growing up, I washed countless loads of laundry, and when I was old enough, I helped my mom with the books. I'm an Eagle Scout, as are two of my brothers, and so growing up, I had a lot of exposure to understanding what my civic responsibilities were, as well as an appreciation for environmental stewardship. Both of those led me to different volunteer opportunities and jobs. As an undergrad, I was involved with the Center for Civic Engagement at my university, the University of Texas at Brownsville. And then during the summer, one year, I was working as a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. As an educator, I started working in the classroom about the age of 18. I was hired before the end of my freshman year as the band director for the Marine Corps Junior ROTC Drum and Bugle Corps at my home high school, James Pace High School. I was then hired by my university to help work with students in aural music theory to help them get up to speed with the rest of the class. I've worked as a teaching assistant at Sam Houston State during my master's degree, and with Huntsville Independent School District in Texas as a substitute teacher. Then I came to the University of Kentucky to work on my doctorate, at which time I put my skills that I learned working at the motel to work for me. I started working for a house flipper over the summer in 2007. And started saving up money and purchasing my own tools, and began working out of the back of my truck once I had enough experience to do that. When my rent was raised in 2007, I turned to my house flipper friend, and he helped me to find a home. When we went to go look at it, the realtor said, "We don't have keys, but you're welcome to climb through the broken window." So that's what we did. I purchased a home that had been abandoned for 15 years. It had 3 pages of code violations against it, including a demolition order from the city. And I put as much work as I legally could myself into the home and managed to get it repaired, and that's where I live today. Currently, I'm adjunct faculty at the Eastern Kentucky University, where I teach 3 music theory courses and am the general tutor for the music theory department. One of my main charges is to increase retention, and so I help to develop a mandatory tutoring program there, and I keep track of all of the freshman and sophomore students to make sure that they are passing all their classes. This is the first year, so we don't have any statistical data yet, but it's looking like our numbers are going to be pretty good for next semester, so I'm optimistic. I've been watching the political arena from the sidelines for quite a while now with growing frustration. And as most people who are lower middle class can probably relate, it's difficult to find the time and the funding to try and become engaged when you see that there is something that you disagree with. And I think that our government, some of our officials, particularly the more wealthy ones who can afford to run for office, know this, and that they take advantage of that and make it even more challenging for common people like us to be able to afford to become engaged. But I felt like I wasn't being represented, and I felt like my friends and my neighbors and my students weren't being represented. So I couldn't wait any longer. When I learned that my current representative, Pratt, was not going to be contested, I finished teaching for the day. I packed up my stuff, drove to Frankfurt, and threw my hat in the ring at about 2 p.m. on the last day to register to run for office. Later that day, I found out that somebody else did the same thing. So I do have a primary race. I don't know Jennifer Uri, but I did have the opportunity to meet her at a Democratic Party training in early February, and we had a really good conversation. We shook hands and agreed that we were going to run clean campaigns, focusing on our own issues and priorities and trying to just put ourselves out there and to not attack each other. And I've kept my end of the bargain, and as far as I know, she's done the same. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank her for that.
That's great. That's really
Thank you.
nice. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our topics and questions. So kind of the biggest issue that's been happening in the last couple months is the state employee pension issues, right? And there was Senate Bill 1, which was defeated, but then at the last minute, there was the whole issue with the sewer bill, right?
Yes.
How do you think that pensions should be funded and the future of the pension system in Kentucky? Do you agree with what the governor is proposing, these 401ks? And if not, what do you propose?
Well, I think that if teachers were allowed to draw Social Security, that the 401ks might be a viable option. But since they're not, it doesn't make sense. I think that we were given a guarantee that we were going to have this stable retirement fund provided to us, and that our government needs to maintain that promise. I think that we need to look into other options for creating new revenue and for cutting out some of the high risk and some of the low return investments that we are having to deal with, because we have people managing that fund that really have no business managing that fund. We should have educators or people associated with or chosen by educators representing those decision-making process. I also think that it's kind of outrageous that we shouldn't, first of all, we shouldn't just be focusing on the education portion of the pensions. We also have firefighters and police and other state employees that are represented, and that includes the legislators who draw a higher percentage and make sure that their own portion is funded. I think that maybe that would be a place to look for some improvements. I don't see sense in having a flat tax, but having a different rate for our pensions, especially when it comes to legislators getting a higher percentage than the teachers do.
Right. So Senate Bill 241 proposed a constitutional amendment that would allow casino gambling and require 100% of proceeds to go to funding retirement systems. Would that be something that you would be interested in? Or if not, what are some other ideas that you would have for increasing funding to help with the pensions?
I think that people are gambling anyways. And I think that the amount of revenue that we are losing by the people who can afford to travel to another state to spend that money is substantial. I think that if we allow casinos and gambling in Kentucky, we are not going to be promoting more gambling. We're just going to be able to capture some of the revenue that the people who are gambling anyways are spending in other locations. So I would support that, and I would, again, like you mentioned, earmark that for funding associated with education and or pensions.
Okay. Governor Bevin's budget would cut funds from public education, and House Bill 134 wants to give tax credits for private school tuition, and this would take away public school money, and the state would lose revenue. What are your ideas to support funding of our public education system in Kentucky, and what are your thoughts on charter schools and tax credits for private school tuition?
We, as a people, invest in school tax because it is for the betterment of society. Having educated people helps us to be more economically stable. It helps us to be more cultural, as well as to be able to interact in a civil society. It does not make sense to take public funds away from educating the public. It will be detrimental to us as a society if we do that. I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea of charter schools or private schools, but they should not be receiving funding from the public education pool if they're not going to be held accountable to the same standards.
Right, right. Okay. So higher education costs are skyrocketing. The average college student ends up tens of thousands of dollars in debt upon graduating from college. You may have some of your own student debt, and then and then you have your children that go to school. You're still trying to pay off your student loans, and now you've got children that you're trying to pay for. Do you have any solutions for this crisis? How can the Kentucky government support our students in their pursuit of higher education?
I think that there is a twofold problem here. I think that universities have allowed their tuition rates to become substantially too high. It should not be that expensive for somebody to get an education. I didn't accumulate any student debt during my undergrad, but in the course of my master's program and my doctorate program, I've got about $45,000. So it's a good deal of money, and as a part-time faculty, I'm definitely not making enough to do that.
Right.
It's been a struggle to keep up with my monthly payments. So I think that we need to do something. We need to revisit academia and find a way to bring that cost down so that it's something affordable for students, so that they can invest in their education and see a more immediate return on that. I think that the government, state and federal, needs to play a role in making sure that it is affordable for people to go to school for higher education. Again, it's for the betterment of society. If we help people to get an education, we have more educated people in the workforce. Educated people usually make more money, so that's more money that comes back into the economy. So just that alone should be enough. I do think that we need to investigate alternative methods of education. Not everybody needs to or wants to go to college. If I had known how much money I could make doing the construction and landscaping business that I have, I might have thought twice about going all the way through my doctorate, because I probably would have been able to retire a lot sooner. But people didn't necessarily make those options available to me or give me the education that it would take to pursue those options. I learned about those just through experience and as an adult. So I think giving people options that fit their needs and their desires is something that we need to look into.
So what would be some of those options? Do you have any ideas that would be, what are you talking about when you're saying these options?
Right, so I would look into these as being programs that could be offered through businesses or through social programs, to where we look into why are people unemployed, why are people underemployed, what do they really want to do with their lives, what can we do to make that happen. And in places where we can't necessarily bring jobs in because it's too challenging or because businesses don't want to move into those locations, working with the people that live in those locations to help them to understand that they can be entrepreneurs. If you can't bring a job in, then make a job where you are. Help people, empower people to be able to create jobs. Those would be things that I would want to look into. And I think that we can find support in private business for those types of entrepreneurial activities.
Right. So going back to when you're talking about how the government can kind of work with higher education to make college more affordable, what do you mean by that? Do you what are your thoughts on that? How could that happen?
Well, excuse me. Much like with public education, and I'm speaking in terms of my own experience as an adjunct faculty and as a part-timer, we don't get paid very much for what we do. We don't get benefits. We don't get retirement. We don't get sick leave or anything like that. We are a relatively cheap entity to employ. And we still, because we are educators and because we care about the kids and because we care about our students and making sure that they are prepared, we put just as much effort into that education as somebody who is a full-time tenure track or tenured professor. Universities are taking advantage of that. When a tenured professor retires, they may replace that position with two part-timers, adjuncts, instead. That's not how things should work. I think that we have a lot of money that is going to places where it doesn't necessarily need to go. And I think that if we invest in what's actually important, which is the quality of the educators that are giving the education to our students, we're going to get more on that return. So universities need to look into how they are using that money and find a way to focus it into the places that are more important. And that doesn't include eliminating programs. That shouldn't be the option.
Right.
Now, I understand, and I'm watching the restructuring going on at Eastern Kentucky University right now, and I understand the choices that are being made. I understand trying to streamline things. I understand the programs that have grown a little bit too large and cumbersome, and trying to rein that in a little bit and make the education that the students receive more beneficial. But that should not mean that we're doing it at the expense of paying the teachers who are doing it less.
Right. Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit, but some of the unemployment numbers in Kentucky, they're due to the lack of skilled workers, right? Here in Northern Kentucky, our economy is booming. How do we ensure that we have enough skilled workers in this area to support our growing economy? And that includes retraining. I mean, the displaced workers who, lost their job and now they're looking for something else.
Yes, absolutely. I think that unemployment is a bad term. We should call it re-employment. We should be putting emphasis into making sure that the people who have found themselves in a position where they are jobless, whether it's because of circumstances within the business or downsizing or whatever, we need to make sure that they are given training and education that will help them to re-enter the workforce, and the knowledge and the ability to keep that job once they get it. Because it's not enough to find somebody a job if they're not trained and capable of being able to maintain that job and see forward progress. And that doesn't just apply to unemployed. That also applies to people who are coming out of prison or people who are coming right out of high school and didn't get into college. We need to find ways to help to educate those people in a direction that will benefit them. My grandfather used to say, he died before I was born, but from what I understand, he used to say, you find something that you love, and then you find somebody who will pay you to do it. So we need to find what it is that these people really want to do, and then help them find the training and the education to be able to do that. Because if you love what you do, then you're going to work harder to keep that job.
So how would you do that? How would the government help do that?
Again, and this is, we can work with private businesses because they're, again, going to be the ones that are going to be reaping the benefits from this. If they have a workforce that is engaged, if they have a workforce that is enthused, then those people are going to be more productive, and the business is going to benefit from it. So working closely with individual businesses to try and find the people that are best suited to work there and want to work there, and then making sure that the training is provided and encouragement to continue to improve and keep those jobs. So on-the-job training through the businesses would be great. If we can renegotiate some of the ways that we have our social programs structured right now to gear some of that money that's already being used in those social programs more towards education, re-education, and helping people to understand the importance of keeping the job once they get it. I think that's what we need to do.
What about technical or vocational schools? Some high schools have them, others don't. And what about, could adults also be taught at those schools as well? What do you think about that?
That's an interesting thought. We, at the University of Kentucky, I often had students that were in their 60s or even 70s that were there through something called the Donovan Scholar Program. and they were just taking those classes for fun and because they wanted to. That might be something that we could look into trying to do with vocational schools associated with high schools as well. Find a way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a scholarship program, but some way to vet those adults who are interested in re-engaging in education, so that we're not having to create a completely brand new program, but just building upon one that already exists. We had magnet schools where I grew up. There was a fine arts academy, there was a technology academy within the high school. So you could go to whatever, you're assigned to high school, but then if you tested into the magnet program, you could go to a different school specifically for that emphasis. I feel like that was very beneficial to the students who were able to. I did not go to the fine arts magnet. I chose to stay at my high school with my friends rather than drive to the other side, and that was my choice. But providing that opportunity to students is an essential thing. It's not enough to just give people the basics of science and math and history, and trust me, that's really important, and we shouldn't be shortchanging that. But to give them life skills, focusing on economics, teaching them the importance of being able to understand how to be thrifty, to save money. I learned all that through the Boy Scouts. I didn't learn that in high school. I don't even remember if I learned how to balance a checkbook in high school. If we're not teaching people how to be functional adults, then what's the point of the education? And I know a lot of teachers who would agree with that, but they're stuck in the box that our government has painted them into and then told you're not being a productive teacher. So yes, we need to re-engineer our public education system so that we are actually teaching people the life skills that they need to be functional, contributing members to our society.
Okay, great. So we're talking about right to work, because that is, we are now a right to work state, right? It's anti-union. What are your thoughts about Kentucky being a right to work state? And if you're elected, what would you do about this?
So, first of all, this is one of those points where I think that our legislators have gotten creative with naming things because it sounds really pretty. And so when people pass it, they are like, oh, this sounds like a really great thing. We should be happy about this. They didn't do that with the sewer bill. But this is one of those cases where you see right to work and you think, well, this is a good thing and it's going to benefit us. But in the long run, it's not. Kentucky is currently ranked 46th in average income. So in the United States, the average income is something around $55,000. In Kentucky, it's something around $45,000. We're about $10,000 below that. And to bring that even more specific, Owen County is about $41,500. It's one of the lowest in the state. Why is that? Why are people making that little money? Because we are not coming together and fighting for our rights. Because we are allowing ourselves to be trampled. We are allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of, and in some cases it's because we don't know any better, because we haven't seen any better. Allowing people to unionize, to come together, brings in more perspectives, allows people to see that they are not alone, and allows them to work together to make a difference. Some people are scared of that.
So if you were elected, would you try to work to repeal that?
Yes, I would communicate with as many people within the legislative body as I could. Which brings us to another side issue, which is if we only elect 5 new people, we're not actually going to make a difference. I've mentioned this to anybody who's listening. If you want to actually make a difference, you've got to get enough people in there to make the changes that you want to see happen. And that includes everything from the possibility of setting term limits to decreasing the percentage on pension for the legislators. You know, these things that have been built up over time through incumbency and people getting comfortable in their positions, if you actually want to see that change, if you want to see a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then you need to get some new people in there.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to talk about minimum wage. Senate Bill 17 wanted to increase the minimum wage for many workers to $10 per hour by 2020. Do you support this, and do you think it's enough?
I do support it, and I don't think that it's enough. I think that people like to talk about trickle-down economics, right? So the idea is give the big businesses loopholes so that they don't have to pay as much taxes. Don't tell them that they have to pay their employees so much. Don't tell them that they have to give these benefits. And they will, by nature, trickle those benefits down to the people. It kind of works the other way. So when you raise the minimum wage, they think it's okay to trickle that up. So it's not just enough to raise the minimum wage and say, oh, great, now I'm going to be paid more, if your employer is going to counter that by saying, well, I'm just going to charge more for everything else to make up the difference.
Right.
There is a certain amount of inherent greed that develops that makes it much more difficult to try and balance the average income with the cost of living. This has gotten completely out of balance, and we need to try to work to find a logical solution that will both bring the income up for the people who are lower class or lower middle class, myself included, while at the same time making sure that products, services don't balloon in response to that. So it's not just a one-sided angle.
Right.
If we're only going to increase to $10 or a little bit more than that, then we need to also counter that by making sure that inflation of prices doesn't respond to that.
Because there's the small businesses that might be hurt by this, and then there's the large Walmarts and everything that might, probably could handle it. How would you talk to the small businesses and let them know that this is a good thing for Kentucky, not a harmful thing? They may have some concerns that it would harm their business.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and as a small business owner myself, I understand the desire and the need to keep your overhead as low as possible. It's a real struggle.
Yeah.
The first 2 years that I spent actually trying to have a business by myself, I was lucky if I broke even.
Right.
And that includes, trying to invest in all these things I didn't think about, the tools that I need, the materials that I need, the truck maintenance, everything that I hadn't really considered about when starting a new business. So, yes, we do need to look into how to make sure that small businesses are impacted as little as possible in that process. I don't have enough. I haven't had enough conversations with people to see what kind of solutions they have, but that would be the first place I would look.
Right.
I would talk to them and say, hey, look, we're thinking about increasing the minimum wage. How is this directly going to affect you, and what can we do to try and minimize that effect? As it is, we've got tons of loopholes that the larger corporations are making use of to avoid paying some or all tax.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense to tax the lowest income, give the highest income these breaks, and then us in the middle class, the small business owners, the entrepreneurs, are the ones that are having to make up the difference. Right. So yeah, I do understand the danger in that, and that would be something that I would need to look into more with some guidance and help.
Right. So, talking about taxes, there was the House Bill 366, which was a huge tax cut for the wealthiest Kentuckians and a shift in reliance onto everyone else. So it looks like we're trying to, give the rich tax breaks and then trying to balance that on the lower income families in Kentucky. What kind of comprehensive tax modernization do you support going forward? If you were elected, what are some of your ideas for a fairer tax system?
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate that you said lower income because it's unfortunate, but it's true that the lowest income really aren't going to be affected very much because they don't pay a lot in taxes. If you don't make enough to pay taxes, then a tax increase really isn't going to affect you. But
unless it's on goods and goods that you're buying, diapers. I heard that floated around. I'm like, that's, when you're buying diapers, you're usually at your poorest because you have
Right.
children. And so that was just a really startling thing for me to see.
Yeah, no, that I definitely understand. I was speaking in terms of the flat tax and for income.
Right.
That's not necessarily going to affect the lowest incomes very much because they may not be paying tax anyways.
Right.
But for somebody like me, who was making that lower bracket, and now I'm going to have to work even harder to try and make up the difference, because usually I end up paying just a little bit in tax. I'm usually just breaking even on what I end up putting in for the taxes. If that changes and now I've got to be writing a check, then that's going to be even harder for me.
Right.
So that imbalance isn't going to work. A flat tax is not making everybody equal. Right. It's not going to increase revenue either, because we're lowering the amount that the upper people were paying, if they were paying anything at all, with the loopholes,
Right.
and putting more on our backs. So that's not going to work. That needs to be revisited, and we need to work on two things with that. We need to simplify it so that people can actually understand that. And that applies to a lot of bills that are going in. Things are so challenging to read right now that most people don't really understand what's being passed. And they have to get somebody to interpret it for them.
Right.
I would hate to say that that's on purpose, but if the people don't understand what it is that the legislators are passing, then they are going to be oblivious to that until it starts to affect them.
Right.
So simplify the taxes so that we can actually understand what we're being taxed for and where that's going, and why, if somebody is not being taxed, they are being off the hook for those taxes.
Right.
Close the loopholes, because yes, they served a purpose at one time, and they did benefit people at one time, but now they're being taken advantage of. So we need to revisit those and get those closed up so that we can rein in some of that income. Sales tax increases are going to affect the lower income more than anybody else, because if a gallon of milk is what, $1.99 if I'm lucky, unless I go to a particular store. Not going to endorse a store. So if that goes up a dollar, or if that goes up even just 10, 15 cents, that accumulates for me, and it becomes a much higher grocery bill for me, which means I have less money to spend anywhere else. That doesn't affect upper income people. They're not going to notice that kind of change. A few pennies on every item is not really going to affect their bank. So raising the sales tax in a state where our average income is 46th, and our cost of living is somewhere around, I think it's 24 or 26, something like that. So our cost of living, we're in the middle compared to the rest of the country, but our annual income is almost at the bottom. So we're going to raise sales tax? No, that doesn't make sense. So we need to put taxes, we need to get our revenue coming from the streams where we can actually afford to have that revenue coming in from, and we need to focus on making it more affordable for people to live in this state.
Right. So that takes me back to marijuana. What are your thoughts on medical marijuana, legal recreational marijuana, and the hemp industry? Do you support any of these as a way to bring in revenue to the state of Kentucky?
Sure. So hemp was a very viable industry up until World War I, World War II. It wasn't until after that where we started actually pushing to make it illegal, and farmers were no longer allowed to grow that. Before then, there were commercials, and you can go back and look for them, historical commercials from the U.S. government encouraging people to grow hemp because we needed it for ropes and for sails and for all sorts of military equipment, as well as for public and commercial use. So going and making it legal to grow hemp is not as big of a change as people are trying to make it sound. This is just going back maybe less than 100 years in history to something that already existed. Medical marijuana should just go ahead and be legalized. We don't need more studies on this. It's been shown, it's been proven, it's already in practice in a lot of different places. There are people here in this state that would benefit from that, and there is some evidence to show that it may actually curb the opioid epidemic if we were to allow that type of medicinal use. So I think that we don't need to have a conversation on that anymore. We don't need further study.
Right.
That needs to go forward. Recreational, I see the value in going ahead and legalizing that. I think that it should be something that is done over a period of time, maybe something like 2 to 5 years. And part of my thought process in making it a graduated program is to give our own economy a chance to take advantage of getting into the industry, as well as to give our local law enforcement and our legislators an opportunity to look into making sure that we are doing this right based on what we're seeing in other locations. We know that in other states that have legalized marijuana, the farms are so productive that they have an overabundance. What I would hate to see is for us to start importing from someplace else and not put our emphasis into giving our own farmers, our agricultural industry, an opportunity to jump on this.
Right.
So if we graduate it in, then that would give them a couple of years to get their agricultural land in process. Right. To get the crop growing, to get it to where it's sustainable, and to where we have enough that we can supply our own demand from within our state.
Right.
Also, this would give our small businesses an opportunity to re-gear, retool, so to speak, to make better use of this as a small business income. So that's my thought on all three of those topics.
So would you be in support of, if we were to legalize marijuana, to the people who were arrested and went to prison for selling marijuana, would you be in favor of letting them back out of prison, or do you think they need to serve their time for something that was illegal at the time?
I think that if we're going to do that, that should also be graduated. We can't just open the doors and let everybody out. But giving them an opportunity to maybe take some classes, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, to prepare them for what they're getting ready to re-enter into. Another of the problems that we have with our prison population is prison has become a business. Right? And so we're not really putting as much effort into rehabilitation as we should be, because how are we going to make money if they don't come back to prison? So as in general, we need to provide more programs so that when people are leaving prison, they have a foot up from where they were when they came in. They're not set back. And so I would include that in the same realm as the people who have been sent to prison on those types of charges. The problem you're going to encounter with that is that if it is still a federally illegal substance, then you are letting people out of prison who may be legal now in terms of our state, but are still not legal in terms of our federal laws. So there needs to be some forward motion on that as well.
Right. Okay. So that leads into kind of the opioid crisis, which has multiple factors involved. Big pharma, physicians overprescribing, and the need for alternative pain medications. What are your thoughts and ideas for combating this epidemic in Kentucky?
Right. So first off, I'm going to say that I think the proposed tax on opioids is a bad idea. And the reason that I think it's a bad idea is because I think if we turn that into a revenue source, we're going to be less inclined to try to make it go away. That's my concern.
Right.
So I would think twice about taxing something, making it into an income, and then being like, oh, we need to get rid of this, but we're making money off of it, so why are we going to get rid of it? That's my problem. We do need to work on getting rid of the opioid problem. It's being abused, and as long as we've got the pharmaceutical companies pushing their product because it's creating sales and it's bringing income, that's going to be a really hard thing to combat. I don't know the right answer to that right now. We as a community, as a people, need to find a way to move forward and combat the big pharma.
Right.
We as a community can provide educational opportunities, rehabilitative opportunities to try and help people who have gotten hooked on this to recover and to move forward. But if we don't break the influx, then we're just going to
Right.
keep
We're
this
not
cycle.
solving the
We're
problem.
not exactly. We're
Right.
not actually solving the problem.
Right, right. Okay, so you agree that there has to be something done on the
Absolutely.
supply side,
Yes.
not just
I've-
on the rehabilitation side.
Through construction work, I get injured a lot. I have a herniated disc in my neck, and it flares up every
Yeah.
once in a while. And because my healthcare sucks, I went in to try and get physical therapy. I was given a prescription for gabapentin, and I was able to pick up that prescription the next day. But I never actually got the physical therapy. I had to wait a month for them to decide, and then they said something was wrong with the paperwork, so I had to wait another month. And so as long as we're making it easy for people to get drugs
Right.
and hard for people to get treatment,
Right.
we're not going to move forward.
No.
So it's a comprehensive problem, and so it needs to be come at from multiple angles.
Right. I totally agree. Okay, so let's go to House Bill 372 was an anti-marriage equality bill. It would allow social service and housing discrimination against same-sex married couples. If you are elected, what would you do to ensure that Kentucky does not discriminate against anyone, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation?
Sure. I think that it is really unfortunate that we have to make this a legislative issue.
Right.
I'm a musician. I came up through a music program, and I've been involved in theater my whole life. And anybody who's been involved in theater and opera knows that it is a very open community, and there are a lot of people who identify as LGBTQ plus. And we understand that, and we accept that as a community. If you couldn't, you wouldn't get very far.
Right.
You would not enjoy music and theater the way that you do. So I think it's really unfortunate that we have to make this a legislative issue. And that's the same thing with abortion. I think that it's really unfortunate that these kind of issues that people have made a moral and religious issue are being brought into our legislative process and are distracting people from the social and economic issues that our government really should be dealing with. Now, with that said, if we're going to have people who are trying to push legislation to force their religious or moral views on us, then we need to be able to respond to protect the people that are being persecuted. So we need to make sure that we are protecting the diversity of our population, and that includes marriage equality, and fair housing, and anything else along those lines. So I would work to try to undo anything that I felt was being approached for issues that were not for the betterment of society in general. Because we're supposed to be representing the people. We're supposed to be the voice of all the people, not
Right.
just a minority that happens to be yelling louder than everybody else at the time.
Right. Okay. House Bill 227 was an anti-solar bill. It would reward monopoly utility companies and punish consumers. If passed, it would have put rooftop solar out of reach for most Kentuckians. Kentucky needs to keep up with the rest of the country in terms of clean, green energy. What would you do to help and protect and promote the use of clean energy?
Sure. So I want solar panels on my house.
I do too.
Yeah, I've got one side of my roof that faces towards the sun, and every day in the summer I'm watching the sun going by, and I'm like, there goes a whole bunch of money
know.
that I could have been saving if I had solar
Right,
panels.
right.
So for me personally, this was a little bit of a devastating thing. We're not just hurting clean energy; we're also hurting small businesses again. There are a lot of small businesses that have put money and efforts into being installers. And now they are going to be affected by that. The twofold purpose of clean energy is, one, to make the environment better, to preserve it for the future, and from a more selfish point of view, it's so that we can save money on
Right.
things like our utilities. So to take away that opportunity, it was a bad decision, and that needs to be undone. It's not helping anybody who needs the help.
Right. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about guns.
Okay.
This is another hot topic. Should Kentucky have stricter gun ownership laws? Do you think that assault rifles should be banned? This is something that a lot of states are looking into, or a lot of people across different states are looking into.
Sure. I am a gun owner. I inherited a couple of guns from my father. They are for protection. As a youth, I was raised understanding how to use and how to respect a firearm. Those values were further encouraged in the Boy Scouts. I have the rifle merit badge, the shotgun merit badge. I've taught the archery merit badge. I have gone through hunter safety courses, which I think are really great opportunities to educate our youth about guns. But I do think that we need to look into having stricter gun control. There are a lot of people who basically, there's like three different ways that you can look at this. There are the people who want to have guns like that because, like assault rifles, because they're fun to shoot.
Yeah.
Okay? And I understand that. I've got family members who are of that persuasion. And I have fired them. And they are fun to shoot. There are people who own those types of weapons because they think it is a method of protection, not necessarily from individuals, because you don't really need an assault rifle to protect yourself from one individual, but protection from the government. If something were to happen and the government were to have a shift, then you have the ability to protect yourselves against similar types of weapons. Right, and then you have people who want those weapons because they intend to use them for harm. There's not a way to reach the people who want to use those weapons to harm other people. Not in terms of gun control at this point. There's social programs, psychology, counseling, those, but you've got to be able to pinpoint them first, right? So how do we try to limit the amount of those types of firearms? The ones that aren't being seen as tools. Hunting, you don't need an assault rifle, style rifle for that. I don't think that it's a feasible idea to put it on the table that we need to collect them all and dismantle, disassemble, destroy them. You're never going to get the support to do that, not by a majority of people. Asking people to voluntarily, if they would like, to take those out of circulation is a viable option, and then making it more, not necessarily more difficult, but more restricted as to who is able to purchase and resell those types of weapons is something that I think that we should look into.
Do you feel like it should be almost like a safety training course that you should go through before you're able to buy some of these guns?
I think that we have driver education for a reason. We are putting people in large metal boxes that they can then use to drive from one location to another, but if they don't know how to do that, they can cause bodily injury to pedestrians, to cyclists, or to other people in other vehicles. So if we're going to do that with motor vehicles, why not teach somebody how to use a gun properly and safely? All the time. I enjoyed having that instruction from my parents as well as from the Boy Scouts, and doing that in a community with other people that were also there to learn the same thing. I think it would be valuable to look into having those types of instructions within a high school situation as well. We used to bring in, when I was in high school, we used to bring in the hunter's education course to our high school, and anybody who wanted to could take it. I think it was like $20 to take it. We should be looking into opportunities to educate people. As long as you don't understand something, you're going to be scared of it. If you understand it, it becomes less scary. So giving people the opportunity to learn about, and if they choose to do so, to learn how to use or how to operate something like that would not be a negative thing to me.
So what are your thoughts on arming teachers in public schools? Do you have any alternative ideas for security, increased security This is a hot debate where
It is.
Some officials want to arm the teachers, but the feedback that I'm hearing from teachers, they don't want to have this responsibility. At least most of them don't.
Right. Well, I'm a scenario person.
Mm-hmm.
I like to run scenarios so that if I find myself in a situation, I might be better able to respond to it. And I've run through the scenario, being a classroom instructor, I've run through the scenario many times of what would I do if there were an intruder. And since this topic has come up, I've put a lot of thought into what would happen if we had teachers who had weapons.
Right.
And in a best case scenario, somebody comes in, a hostile person comes in with a weapon, whether it's a student or somebody coming in off of the street, and you've got a responsible, well-trained teacher who is carrying a weapon, who has students that respect them and respect the weapon that he has on she has on her person. The teacher hears that there is a shooter, engages themselves, goes into the situation, fires, hits their target, and disables or kills the perpetrator. That is a perfect situation. Right? That is not going to be the most likely outcome. There are so many different options for how that could go wrong. Anywhere from the possibility of a student becoming irate and taking the gun off of the professor, off of the teacher. And it doesn't have to be in a struggle situation. If you watch law enforcement, if you start getting close to them, they're very protective of their space and of their body. Educators can't really do that. A lot of us have formed very close relationships with students, and students are going to approach you, so you can't have that kind of automatic defense all the time. So lock it up. Well, now you've got to go through the extra step of getting to the gun beforehand. What happens if you engage and you miss and you hit a student or another teacher? What happens if you've got 5 teachers who all have weapons and all of you engage from different angles, and now you've got crossfire going on in addition? What happens if you've got teachers who engage and then law enforcement shows up and they see 5 people with guns? They're going to, one, hesitate and possibly miss the opportunity to take out an active shooter, or 2, think that the teacher is the active shooter and make a mistake and accidentally shoot a teacher instead. There are just too many things that could possibly go wrong with this. It's not something that we shouldn't look into, but there's got to be a whole lot of research and a whole lot of checks and balances put into this before we were to consider that. And as a teacher, I can think of some people that I would definitely not want to see walking around my school carrying a weapon. And they might be the most likely ones to jump up and say, I'll carry a weapon. So that there's also that possibility. Vetting the person. It's a very important process. So mixed feelings on that a lot, but mostly leaning towards no, we should not be doing that. I think a large amount of training and education needs to go into working with students and working with counselors in order to be able to identify the possibility of somebody who might be considering that. I think that putting armed guards at schools is just going to cause that active shooter to go down to the library or to a church or to somewhere else. We're not actually addressing the problem. And the problem is we have people who are unstable and not receiving enough attention or treatment, and they are able to get a hold of guns. So we need to make it harder for people to get a hold of guns that shouldn't be getting a hold of guns, and we need to work on identifying and helping the people who are at high risk.
Yep, absolutely. So, okay, great. So we're at the end of our questions, our question time. So if you want to just take a couple minutes here, talk to the audience and tell them why they should vote for you on May 22nd.
Sure. Thank you. I'm not I'm not particularly politically knowledgeable. I don't have a lot of experience in politics, but I do have a great deal of experience in leadership. I've worked on founding programs at different schools and within the community. I was a program director at a couple of different Boy Scout camps and made great progress with innovative solutions to programming and with bringing in people that have knowledge and experience to help make sure that we are going in the right direction. So I have leadership, and I also have the ability to come at things from a unique perspective and come up with creative solutions to problems. And I think that's really what our government needs right now. We need someone who can approach things from outside of the political box. We need someone who isn't going to look at a problem and say, oh, well, we can't consider doing that because we've never done it that way before. We need people who are not just going to say yes because somebody told them to say yes. What we need are people who can think for themselves, make decisions that are going to be representative of the interests of the people that they are supposed to be representing. We are called representatives for a reason. We are supposed to be representing your voice. I don't see how we can represent your voice if we're not listening. So I hope that you will take the time to get engaged and come out to the polls on May 22nd. No matter who you are voting for, just come out and vote because we need you. We need you to be active so that we can make a change. And then again, remember November, because if we don't get enough new people in there, it's not going to matter if we change one or two. We've got to have enough people in office to make a difference.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your time with us. And thanks, everybody, for watching. Please go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. You can watch this again and join us for our next episode. Thanks, everybody.